This episode is sponsored by Calm Mind Behavioral Health Counseling. If today's topic resonates with you, it might be a sign to seek support. Michael C. Thompson, a licensed professional counselor, offers convenient online therapy from the comfort of your home. He specializes in helping individuals navigate anxiety, trauma, and addictive behaviors by fostering self-awareness and self-compassion. This is about empowering you to take control of your life. Schedule a free, no-obligation 15-minute consultation to see if it's the right fit for you. Take the first step at calmmind.life. Hello, and welcome to the Mindful Insights podcast. I'm Charlie Michaels, and I am so glad to be joined by my insightful co-host, Michelle Thomas.
It's wonderful to be here, Charlie. Today, we are continuing our deep dive into the cluster A personality disorders, the ones often labeled as odd or eccentric. Last time, we explored the world of paranoid personality disorder, and today we're shifting our focus to a condition that is perhaps even more misunderstood, schizoid personality disorder.
That's right. And before we dive in, just a gentle reminder that while we explore topics related to emotional well-being, we are not mental health professionals. This conversation is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy or advice from a qualified professional. Please be sure to seek out guidance for your individual needs.
An essential reminder. Schizoid personality disorder is a term that many people have probably never heard, and for those who have, it's often confused with other conditions. It really challenges our basic assumptions about what it means to be human and connected.
It absolutely does. It forces us to look beyond behavior and ask a much deeper question. What is the motivation behind a person's way of being in the world? Let's get into it. So, to start at the very foundation, schizoid personality disorder, or SPD, is defined by a pervasive pattern of detachment from social relationships and a markedly restricted range of emotional expression. This isn't shyness, it's not social anxiety. It's a profound and stable lack of interest in or desire for social connection that begins by early adulthood and shows up across almost every area of life.
I think the first question that pops into most people's minds is, isn't that just extreme introversion? We all know people who love their alone time, who need to recharge after being social. How is this different?
That is the single most important distinction to make right at the top. While an introvert enjoys solitude to recharge, they are still fully capable of forming deep, meaningful relationships and deriving pleasure from them. For someone with SPD, the condition is defined by a pathological lack of desire for those bonds in the first place. It's not about needing to recharge, it's about a fundamental disinterest in plugging in at all. And critically, this pattern leads to significant functional impairment.
So it's the difference between a preference for quiet and a fundamental lack of affiliative motivation? That's a huge distinction.
It is. The diagnostic criteria from the DSM-5-TR really paint a clear picture. The very first criterion is that the individual neither desires nor enjoys close relationships, including being part of a family. Think about the power of that statement. It's a detachment that extends to the most fundamental social unit we have.
It's profound. And I can see how that would then lead to the next criterion, which is almost always choosing solitary activities. If you don't desire connection, your life will naturally be structured around solitude.
Exactly. They might gravitate toward abstract or mechanical tasks, things like computer programming, mathematics, or puzzles, which allow for deep engagement without the messy complexities of human interaction. Another key feature is anhedonia, which is a diminished capacity to experience pleasure. The criteria state they take pleasure in few, if any, activities.
That sounds like a life lived in monochrome. One firsthand account I read described it as walking through a black and white movie, where events are happening, but they lack any emotional color or personal meaning. There's this pervasive sense that everything seems so dull.
That's a perfect metaphor. And this extends to how they respond to the world around them. Another criterion is that they appear indifferent to praise or criticism of others. This isn't arrogance. It's that social feedback, positive or negative, just doesn't seem to have a strong emotional impact. This all contributes to the final key feature, showing emotional coldness, detachment, or a flattened affect. This is the observable part, a lack of facial expression, not smiling or nodding in conversation, appearing emotionally unresponsive.
And yet, this is where it gets so fascinatingly complex. While the external life seems barren, clinical descriptions consistently point to a rich, elaborate, and exclusively internal fantasy life. It creates this deep schism between their inner world and their outward presentation. The subjective experience is often of being an observer rather than a participant in one's own life.
Precisely. And that leads us to a much deeper, more complex question. The standard descriptive view presents this detachment as a simple lack of interest. But psychodynamic theories challenge this, suggesting that the indifference we see on the surface isn't a primary state, but rather a powerful secondary defense.
A defense? A defense against what?
A defense against the perceived dangers of intimacy itself. Let's take a quick break, and we'll dive into that when we return.
For all the exhausted men out there who feel trapped in emotionally unstable relationships, reclaiming your reality is here to help. Do you constantly question your own reality? The workbook, Reclaiming Your Reality, A Man's Guide to Healing from the Exhaustion, Emasculation, and Entrapment of an Emotionally Unstable Relationship, is for you. It provides the tools to understand the chaos, set powerful boundaries, and start rebuilding your life based on your own values. Stop walking on eggshells and start reclaiming your reality. Find the workbook on Amazon or learn more at calmmind.life.
Welcome back to Mindful Insights. Before the break, Charlie, you introduced a fascinating idea that the profound detachment of schizoid personality disorder might not be a simple lack of desire, but a powerful defense mechanism. Let's unpack the why. Where does a pattern this profound come from?
Well, like with all personality disorders, the consensus points to a biopsychosocial model, that classic interplay of nature and nurture. There's evidence for a genetic component, as PD is more common in families with a history of schizophrenia or schizotypal personality disorder, suggesting a shared genetic liability.
So there's a biological predisposition. What about temperament?
That seems to be a key factor. Research suggests certain innate temperamental traits create a vulnerability. These can include high harm avoidance, a tendency to be shy and socially inhibited, and low novelty seeking, which leads to more isolated behavior. Think of it as the starting clay. But it's the environmental factors that really shape that clay into its final form.
And this is where it gets heartbreaking. The research consistently points to the impact of a negative early caregiving environment. Childhoods marked by parental figures who are emotionally cold, neglectful, remote, or intrusive are strongly implicated as risk factors. When a child's fundamental need for warmth and secure attachment goes unmet, they learn a devastating lesson.
What lesson is that?
That seeking connection leads only to pain, disappointment, or danger. So, as a survival strategy, the child retreats into a self-sufficient inner world where they can't be hurt. The withdrawal that started as a state-dependent coping mechanism, repeated over years and years, eventually hardens into an inflexible personality trait. It's a defense that becomes a prison.
That's a perfect explanation, and it leads directly into a core psychodynamic concept called the schizoid dilemma. It suggests that the individual is caught in a terrible internal conflict between two profound and opposing fears: the fear of being consumed and losing one's sense of self in a relationship, versus the fear of being completely isolated and cut off from all human connection.
So they can't tolerate being with people, but they also can't tolerate being completely alone. That sounds like an impossible bind.
It is. So the withdrawal into a solitary existence becomes the only viable solution to an otherwise unmanageable conflict. This is how it plays out in their relationships, which are often structured in unconventional ways to manage this dilemma. For example, they might engage in what's called an in and out cycle.
What does that look like?
Driven by a flicker of loneliness, they pursue a connection. But as soon as intimacy is achieved and the partner reciprocates, the fear of being engulfed becomes overwhelming. They then emotionally shut down and withdraw to reestablish a safe distance. Once they feel safe again, the loneliness returns, and the cycle can start all over again. It's a tragic replay of their core conflict.
And I imagine this has a huge impact on their professional lives as well.
It really depends on the profession. Because of their preference for solitude, many individuals with SPD can function quite well and even thrive in jobs that allow them to work alone. Think of roles like a scientific researcher, a writer, a laboratory technician, or a night security guard. The problems arise when their job requires teamwork, social negotiation, or significant interpersonal skills. In those roles, their apparent indifference and inability to navigate social cues can really hinder their advancement.
It all comes back to that central theme, finding a way to exist in a world that is so fundamentally built on the social connection they either don't desire or deeply fear.
It certainly does. We'll be back to discuss how this compares to other conditions right after this.
Looking for a story that's as gripping as it is insightful? The novel Anger's Bitch by Michael C. Thompson is a character-driven drama that pulls you in from the first page and doesn't let go. It's a powerful story about the weight of the past and the courage it takes to earn a second chance. With unforgettable characters and a plot that keeps you guessing, this is more than just a book. It's an experience. If you love a story with soul, heart, and suspense, Anger's Bitch is your next must-read. Available now on Amazon.
Welcome back to Mindful Insights. We've explored the what and the why of schizoid personality disorder, this defensive retreat from the interpersonal world. Now let's get into the broader context, which involves some really crucial distinctions from other conditions.
Right, because social withdrawal is a behavior, not a diagnosis in itself, and it shows up in a lot of different conditions. So my first big question is, how do you distinguish SPD from avoidant personality disorder? Both result in someone being very isolated.
This is probably the most common point of confusion, and the answer comes down to that core motivation we keep circling back to. The person with SPD is socially withdrawn because they genuinely do not desire relationships. Their loneliness, if they feel it, is often ego-syntonic. It's consistent with their self-concept.
Okay, so it's apathy-driven. What about the person with avoidant personality disorder?
The person with AVPD, in contrast, deeply craves connection, but actively avoids it because of an overwhelming fear of rejection, humiliation, and criticism. They feel their loneliness acutely and painfully. It's ego dystonic. So we have one person saying, I don't care about people, and another saying, I'm terrified people will hurt me. The behavior might look similar, but the internal worlds are universes apart.
That makes so much sense. The other big area of overlap people talk about is with autism spectrum disorder, especially in adults who may not have been diagnosed as children. How does a clinician tell these apart?
This is a huge and very important challenge in diagnostics. The key conceptual framework is the difference between social motivation versus social capacity. Again, SPD is seen as a primary deficit in social motivation. ASD, on the other hand, is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by primary deficits in social capacity. An autistic person may strongly desire relationships, but lacks the neurotypical toolkit to build and maintain them effectively because of challenges with nonverbal cues and social reciprocity.
And there's a really concrete diagnostic clue, isn't there? The one thing that's part of an autism diagnosis that is completely absent in the criteria for SPD.
Exactly. And that is the presence of restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, as well as sensory sensitivities. Things like stereotyped motor movements and inflexible adherence to routines or hyper-reactivity to sounds or textures are hallmarks of autism and are not features of SPD. A thorough developmental history is essential to make that distinction.
So the big takeaway here is that you absolutely cannot diagnose based on the behavior of social isolation alone. The why underneath whether it's apathy, fear, or a difference in neurodevelopment, is everything. It dictates the entire path forward.
It does, and that path is difficult because treatment for SPD is very challenging. The condition is egosyntonic, so people with SPD rarely seek help on their own. And when they do, the core task of therapy, forming a trusting alliance with a therapist, runs directly counter to their entire personality structure.
So, what can be the goal of therapy, if not to make the person more sociable?
That's the key question. The goal is rarely to transform them into an extrovert. It's about improving their overall quality of life and mitigating functional impairment. This might mean treating a co-occurring major depression, which is very common. It might mean helping them identify and challenge core beliefs that cause problems, or it could be helping them find and maintain a life niche, a career, a home environment that is compatible with their temperament and causes them the least amount of stress.
So it's about acceptance and adaptation, not a forced personality transplant. It's about finding a way to be content, even in solitude. And it's interesting, many people with SPD have found a unique form of community in online spaces, like the r/Schizoid subreddit. It allows for connection on their own terms, asynchronous, anonymous, and at a safe distance. To me, that showed the human need for connection might not be absent, just deeply, deeply protected.
That's a beautiful and helpful way to frame it, Michael. It's not about eliminating the protective shell, but perhaps in time building a small, safe window in it.
I love that image. We're going to take one last short break, and then we'll wrap up. Do you want to know your purpose? The latest post on the Mindful Insights Substack, Finding Purpose and Living Values, explores how to reconnect with what truly matters. It's about moving beyond societal expectations and discovering your own authentic direction. To help you on this journey, there's a free value clarification exercise available at calmmind.life. It's a powerful tool to help you identify your core principles and start building a more meaningful life today. Visit calmmind.life to get started.
Welcome back. It's so important to approach these topics with real nuance. When you just see the label schizoid, you miss the entire complex, often painful, internal world of the person.
I couldn't agree more. Understanding the why truly is the bridge from judgment to compassion. Thank you for helping us build that bridge today, Michelle. And my thanks to all of you for listening. You've been listening to the Mindful Insights podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please consider subscribing and maybe share it with someone you think might need to hear it. You never know who you might be helping. Until next time, be kind to your mind.